Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back into the video today. Today, the Houston Texans received some very bad news about the young star Derek Stingley Jr., who was the number 3 overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. Stingley suffered a hamstring injury and is going to be out for several weeks and might be placed on the IR and is going to be out for the minimum 4 games and is probably going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks. Derek Stingley Jr. hurt himself against the Indianapolis Colts last week in Week 2, and now it's undetermined when he will return. Shaquille Griffin is supposed to replace Derek Stingley Jr. At the starting cornerback position. And ironically, his first game as a starter for the Texans will be against his former team, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Stingley, the number 3 overall pick for the Texans last year, played 9 games for the Texans last year with 43 tackles and 1 interception. I don't know if it's the same hamstring, but did hurt his hamstring last year in Week 10 against the New York Giants. And with that injury against the Giants in Week 10, Stingley missed the rest of the year. He played Week 1 and most of Week 2, got hurt in the second half in Week 2 against the Colts, and was targeted 5 times. The opposing team threw the ball to whoever he was defending 5 times, and three receptions and 68 receiving yards were caught against him. So it hasn't been that great in the early on for the Texans, but it's very early. This is not looking good for the Texans because the Texans picked this guy over a guy like Sauce Gardner, who's just been incredible for the New York Jets, and it's very hard to realize that we picked him over Sauce Gardner. I'm not giving up on Stingley just yet, and I've seen so many Texans fans on Twitter giving up on him and giving up on Nick Caserio. I can understand giving up on Nick Caserio, but I'm not ready to give up on Derek Stingley just yet. I know he's had injury problems, right? But he's not, as far as I know, he's not out for the year. He will play again this season. But if another injury happens after this, okay, maybe it's time to give up on him. It's only been 2 hamstring injuries. Yes, his injuries have been a problem going back since college. And yes, the Texans should have drafted Sauce Gardner. That's you're not going to hear me disagree on that. Texans should have drafted Sauce Gardner, but that doesn't mean that Stingley's not a good player. I think he's a really good player, and he's been good when he's been on the field. Maybe not this season, but he was good on the field when he was out there last year, and I think he will be good for the Texans again. I just don't know when that will be this year. He's going to miss around 4 to 6 games for the Texans, and that includes the bye week. So he might miss 4 to 7 weeks for the Texans, and we'll see when he returns. I think it's going to be interesting to see how he looks when he returns. But is Nick Caserio, Texans general manager, on the hot seat now? I would think not. I know Texans fans are saying it's time to fire him. I think that it depends on how this team does throughout the year, but injuries have hurt this team so far. That's been the main. If you describe early on to the season you start, if you describe early on, I think the one word to describe this season so far for the Houston Texans has been injuries. But I just think if the Texans don't win more than 4 games this year, which I see them doing, let's say more than 5 games this year, if they win less than 5 games, I think you probably see Caserio get fired. But I look at a couple of the drafts in the last couple of years, and I feel like Caserio has done really good in the previous drafts. I thought he did really good in free agency last year as well. Look at some of the guys he added in free agency. Last spring in March, he added into the offense a guy like Noah Brown. I know he's on IR, but he's a good wide receiver. Dalton Schultz, who's going to be one of C.J. Stroud's best targets this year. He added in Jimmy Ward, who hasn't played in the first 2 games, but while there is some bad news to the secondary with Derek Stingley, going down with a hamstring injury, Jimmy Ward is returning to the Texans lineup on Sunday against the Jags. It'll be great to have him back. He made a whole other bunch of moves throughout the offseason. picking up a guy like Hassan Ridgeway. He's another guy that's hurt. I mean, there's so many injuries right now to this team as of right now, and that's what's killing this team. And he made some other significant moves in free agency. And then the draft, the two past drafts, I thought mainly the 2022 draft. Yes, the first round, not that great at all. Derek Stingley Jr. has been injured. Kenyon Green was terrible in his rookie year and is out for the season this year. Those two guys, first round, terrible job by Nick Caserio. But look at the other draft picks in the 2022 NFL draft. Jalen Petrie. He's been a stud for the Texans, was unbelievable for the Texans in his rookie season. And once he's able to return, which he's expected to return either week 4 against the Steelers or week 5 against the Saints, he will have a Pro Bowl-like season for the Texans. John Mechie III played in his first NFL game last week, had one reception for 17 yards. He's going to be one of Stroud's favorite targets. Christian Harris, linebacker, he's developing into this Texans defense. He's a stud. How about this one? A 4th-round draft pick, Dameon Pierce. Had 980 rushing yards and only played in 14 games last season. Was a stud for this Texans offense. Has had a slow start to the season so far, but Dameon Pierce has been a big part of this offense for the last year. And I think that even though Pierce has started off slow to start the season, although his carries are pretty down compared to what they were last year, I do believe that Dameon Pierce in the 4th round has been very good for a 4th-round pick. And then a 6th-round pick, a guy like Tegan Quintanaro, a tight end. He's been really solid in his first season and to start this season as well. And he was a 6th-round pick. I mean, look at the draft before, this draft. That was the draft I just talked about was the 2022 NFL draft. Look at the 2023 NFL draft. C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson. I mean, what a trade it was to trade up for Will Anderson Jr. by Nick Caserio. He maybe gave up a little too much, but you got C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson Jr. And then some of the later draft picks, Juice Scruggs and Tank Dell. I know Juice Scruggs hasn't played a game yet, but he'll return. I believe he returns week 5 or week 6 for the Texans. He's going to be a stud at the center position. Tank Dell, his first 2 games, he's been a stud for the Houston Texans. He had I think it was 4 or 5 receptions for 72 receiving yards and one receiving touchdown. Should have had 2 receiving touchdowns against the Colts, but there was a stupid holding call. And then another draft pick, 4th-round draft pick, Henry To'o, linebacker from Alabama. How about this? A 6th-round draft pick, Xavier Hutchinson, wide receiver from Iowa State. I mean, just some great draft picks by Nick Caserio over the last 2 years. I think there is a chance you could see Nick Caserio get fired this year. I just wouldn't think as of right now he's on the hot seat yet, but I think it is definitely possible to happen. This very well could be Nick Caserio's last year in Houston. I would think I think it matters in November. I think November is when you're going to really start to see, all right, is Nick Caserio's job really on the line here? Because I kind of see the Houston Texans being buyers in the trade deadline. They have the draft picks to make some move at the trade deadline. They're going to want to make some room to improvement in the deadline. At the deadline, the deadline's October 31st. So, and then by October 31st, you play a game. I think it's October 29th against the Carolina Panthers, and that's your 7th game of the season. So I think, that middle week after week 8 against the Panthers and the trade deadline's over, I think once you're 7 games in and once the trade deadline's over and you kind of have an identity, I think that's when it's going to start to get into is Caserio on the hot seat for the Houston Texans. And who knows, maybe by week 8, week 9, maybe Derek Stingley Jr. is back for the Houston Texans, or maybe even before that. But I think the Texans are going to be buyers at the deadline. I really do. I think they're going to want to add in a wide receiver. I don't know who that will be. You have some names open like Mike Evans, Marquise Brown, Hunter Renfrow. I think the Texans are going to want to improve this defense to the deadline. I think they're going to I think mainly they're going to eye a guy like Daniil Hunter from the Vikings, but I think they could eye a couple other players. I think mainly they're going to try to add in a defensive lineman, probably a defensive end, or a defensive tackle for that matter. But I think the Texans are going to be buyers at the deadline. But the Texans haven't really done that. Mainly since Caserio has been with the Texans, since he's been the GM, they've been sellers. So let's see how he does as a buyer at the trade deadline. I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. But I think it's very well true. This could be Caserio's last year as the GM for the Houston Texans. But I think something he can prove himself with is definitely being a buyer at the trade deadline, and we'll see what they make. Well, let's see what they do at the deadline. If I were the Texans, I would try to maybe make a move for Mike Evans, but if not, maybe trade for Marquise Brown of the Cardinals and defensive end Danielle Hunter. I think those would be two really good moves because those are two guys you could buy that will be a little bit cheap. Marquise Brown, I don't think he's an expiring contract, but the Cardinals are a terrible team. They'd be willing to give him up for maybe a 5th or 4th round draft pick. Danielle Hunter, you can get him for maybe a 3rd or 4th round pick, maybe a 3rd and a 5th round pick. So you can get those guys for mid-round draft picks. And Danielle Hunter and Marquise Brown, two guys like that would make this Houston Texans team better. I believe the Texans will be buyers at the trade deadline, but let's see how Caserio handles that. I think that will be the big evaluation if this will be Caserio's final season as the Houston Texans general manager. But you guys let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on Stingley being out for 4 to 6 weeks, probably being placed on the injured reserve with a hamstring injury. And let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Do you think the Texans should fire Nick Caserio after the end of this season, or should they keep him? Is Caserio on the hot seat? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and peace out.